what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm really excited to be here and give you another really awesome guitar tutorial regarding how to shred in weird keys or uncommon keys. Firstly, let's start with this. Why would we want to shred or learn how to play guitar and improvise and write solos in weird keys? So first, let's talk about this. Why am I calling certain keys weird keys? Well, it kind of dates back to the 80s when metal bands were only using keys like E minor, keys like A minor, sometimes D minor. I'm talking about the really big bands like Metallica, like Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax. Those bands only use the key of E minor. Most of their songs were in that key, okay? And what did that do? Well, that caused a lot of guitar players to learn those songs and get used to the key of E minor as well as A minor, sometimes D minor, okay, but mostly E minor and A minor, okay? This is a huge problem because everybody was brought up only learning how to shred and solo in that key just from learning those kinds of things. And it doesn't help that obviously the infamous minor pentatonic on fret number 5 really set everybody up for failure for working in keys that they were kind of just not really used to. And it's going to be a lot more than just taking the shape and moving it to a different fret. That's not really going to be enough for you to actually sound and stand out in front of other guitar players. Okay, so the reason why we're doing that is because modern metal takes every single key possible, modulates from key to key, does all kinds of really cool stuff. So if you're trying to be a lead guitar player in a band, or if you're trying to just be as good of a lead guitar player as you can be, you're going to want to pay attention to this video because I'm going to help you get through these really chaotic and weird keys that have 5 flats, 6 flats, 4 flats, 5 sharps, etc., etc. I'm going to show you some methods that will help you get through these things, okay? So before we get into actually what we're doing, let's talk about what a weird key actually is. Well, like I said, most songs back in the day were in key of E minor and A minor. So I would call a weird key something with a key signature of at least 4 sharps or 4 flats or greater. So in this circumstance, we're going to be using 5 flats in the key signature, so D flat major, or rather B flat minor. I'll show you what all that stuff means here in a second. And just to give you one more reason why you should be doing this is because if you're a guitar player, I'm assuming you want to be as good as you can and sound as unique as you can. If you're playing in the key of A minor and E minor for every single thing that you play, or most thing that you play, do you really think that you're going to sound as unique as the guitarist who can play in B flat minor, G flat minor, F minor, C minor, and do all these really, really cool things in those weird keys? Of course not. In fact, when you hear a song that's in one of these keys, I guarantee you turn your head a little bit and you're like, huh, that sounds pretty cool. It's because our ears are so accustomed to those keys that we already talked about. You're used to the sound of those keys, but when you hear songs that are outside of that, you're like, dang, it sounds like a pretty cool song. So obviously there's no weird key necessarily. Obviously every key or key signature or scale uses the same whole half step pattern for their major scale, for their minor scale, for their diatonic triads and all that stuff. But still, we don't use those keys very often, so that's what we're doing today. We'll go through some steps about how to start going about this. Like I said, we're going to be using the key of B flat minor as our key for today. I'm a full step down, so we're going to be on fret number 6 of the low E string. That is your spot that we're going to be starting. So all of these methods that I'm talking about are methods that I teach my students in my masterclass, Shred Theory Mastery. So if you're interested in learning this in greater detail and you want some more help on it, just go ahead and click the link below and get in contact with me and we'll talk. The very first prerequisite or the first step for this is music theory. Okay, so the basic forms of music theory that we want to really understand is number 1, the key signature. Okay, number 2 is the relative key. Number 3 is the 7 diatonic triads in that key. And then number 4 is emphasizing the tonic, the dominant, and the diminished chord or arpeggio. First, we can talk about the key signature of B flat minor. So if we're looking at the circle of fifths, okay, if we count in fourths with the flats going in the major key, we go from C to F, F to B flat, and then B flat to E flat, and then E flat to A flat, and then A flat to D flat. So every time you count up a fourth, you're adding a flat to the key signature. Okay, so if we look at the key that has 5 flats, it's D flat major on the outside, and then the relative minor, which gets step 2, is B flat minor. Okay, if you want an easier way of getting the key signatures down, just go to the second to last flat in the key signature, and that's actually your answer. So you could see the second to last flat is D flat. Okay, so that's the major key. So if D flat major is your major key over on, let's say we start at fret number 9, all you'd have to do, technically speaking, is just go back 3 frets to fret number 6. So now that we've got that, we can play our minor scale on fret number 6 of the low E string. Okay, you can use any minor scale position that you're comfortable with. You can play the minor pentatonic if you're only used to that, or the major pentatonic on the note D flat, obviously. Okay, all fine. Okay, but for me, I'm going to be using things like the natural minor, harmonic minor, and major scale. Now it begs the question, with a full 7-note minor scale starting on fret 6, if you go through it normally on just the low E string, okay, those are 7 notes. So we have B flat, we have a C natural, we have a D flat, then we have an E flat, an F. Right here we have our G flat, and then right here we have our A flat. So those are our notes in the scale. So now what we got to do is turn them into our diatonic chords or triads. Okay, so let's talk about that real quick. How you make a diatonic triad, as I've talked about on this channel before, is we're using the root third fifth method. So that basically means that we're with whichever note that I just said, count up a third from it, then count up a fifth from it in that scale, and that will give you the exact correct notes to play if we're not adjusting anything. So for example, if you start on the note B flat for B flat minor, up a third would be D flat, and then up a fifth would be F natural. Just like that, okay? So if that's the circumstance, we can go through every single note using that root third fifth method, and what we get is the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord being minor triads, the 2 chord being diminished, and then the 3, the 6, and the 7 being major triads, okay? So you can see them on the screen. It's nothing too crazy, okay? So that means that if somebody said, hey, we're going to be playing a 1 chord, you play on right here, make a bar chord right there. If somebody said to play a 3 chord, a 3 chord would be major. If somebody said a 2 chord, diminished. And then resolve the chord progression, just for fun. But that's how you make those diatonic chords and triads, okay? So the easiest way that you can do that is just by using bar chords, okay? And the bar chords are going to play a really important part in your arpeggios in a second. So step number 2, we're going to continue going through all of this stuff across the fretboard, okay? So we already outlined our scale, both in terms of 1 octave going right here, okay? If you'd like to finish the scale, and then go to the relative major, those are 2 really good scales that you can use just to start soloing. You can also bump those up 12 frets. Etc., etc. You can start it on the A string. Just like that, okay? So there are a lot of options that you have throughout the fretboard to do this. Kind of the main concept here, after you get those scales down, is to go through, like I said, the diatonic triads, okay? And that the best way that you can do this, in my opinion, as long as you have your bar chords down, is to go through the bar chords and then split them up into smaller segments. For example, if we're at the tonic on the 6th fret and it looks like this, technically speaking, you can just sweep that, right? Easier said than done to do that, so make it smaller by doing this shape right here. That would be probably one of the easiest ways that you can play your tonic right there. Just like that, okay? If we think of the 3 chord, like I said before, on the note D flat, turn this shape into a smaller arpeggio, okay? So now, where do we go with all this information? Like if I said the diminished chord on 2, since we're using this 1, 3, 2, all we'd really need to do with that is use a diminished arpeggio right there. You can find another note that's on the note C and do a diminished. Given that you're starting to understand how these bar chords work, you can do the same thing on the A string. Like if somebody said to play a 4, just go to the 4th note, the minor chord, right? Because the 4 chord is minor in a minor key. Turn this into a shape, because then you can do your 1, and then maybe you could do your diminished starting on the note C somewhere, like. And then if you know where you're at with the fretboard, and get into the scale over there. That's the whole thing that we're kind of getting to, is now that we're starting to understand how to build basic arpeggios in these keys, how can we get from an arpeggio to another arpeggio to a scale, then back to an arpeggio, then to another scale, then to another scale? That's the thing that you need to practice. This is down to you in this circumstance, because you need to take arpeggio shapes and figure out how you can get out of them and back into the scale. My best advice for you is this: wherever you're at with this, in terms of your arpeggio to a scale, look for the root of B flat minor. And that brings me to another point for this. To build this habit, you're going to take licks that you're already very comfortable and familiar at, and you're going to use it in those specific shapes. So for example, a lot of guitar players do something like this, for example. If that's a signature thing that you do whenever you improvise or do things, find the key of B flat minor and do that in there. So if this was the key of D minor, okay, if maybe you are someone who's a really big fan of doing the group of 6 like this, try that on the 6th fret. Maybe try that over here. These are the kinds of things that you need to mentally develop and prep for with shredding, okay? You're going to take the exercises, the licks, the style that you have, and apply it to this new key and get used to it. It takes time to do all this stuff, okay? But that's kind of the whole point of this, is you need to actually practice it. So that's going to bring me to the next point. You need to start using this in terms of improvising, okay? So I would say give yourself once a week or twice a week, pull up a backtrack, go in the key of D flat major or B flat minor, just do natural minor for now, and start utilizing this sort of method, okay? This is very, very important for you to start really developing the habits of shredding in other keys instead of mindlessly going through the same keys that we're so used to. The time frame for that, give yourself a full month in this key before you move on to the next key. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Step number 5 kind of has 2 parts depending on how advanced you are on the guitar, okay? So step number 5 would be to start using harmonic minor, okay? Because we want to start being able to utilize the tension chords like the dominant chord. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a moment. The other half of step 5 is if you are past that too, you're going to start using things like the secondary dominant, like the Neapolitan chord, like the borrowed chords, chromatic mediants. All those things are really, really good to start developing in here and modulating into other keys. So let's go through some of these. So if you're at the part where you can do harmonic minor, you're going to want to start using the diminish more on 2 and 7, right? And you're also going to want to start using the dominant chord, right? Because with harmonic minor, you're raising the 7th note in the scale, okay? Basically meaning that the third of the 5 chord, okay, which is F, right? So this note is an A natural. So F A C, it used to be F A flat C, right? So it went from this to now this. Okay, so that chord, especially when you make it a 7, is going to create a lot of tension. Okay, and I'm going to show you some really easy arpeggios to utilize for that if you're in that spot. Okay, so remember, make sure that the tension chords are in those backtracks. Look for the dominant chord, make sure it's harmonic minor. Look for the tension chords like the diminished chord, because those can be intertwined with each other. All right, so the dominant 7 chord can be a little bit scary for some people when you're adding some of these things, but it's really not that bad. Okay, so again, I'm going to use a very similar method as before, is to look at the bar chord. Okay, so if we're here as our tonic, our dominant is right there, right? Okay, that's one of my favorites. You can also do this triad shape. And the best part about this is we're just doing those 2 shapes for now. Those can be used in intertwined with diminished. I'm just playing around a little bit with that, but just to give you a start with that, that might be the best way that you can do it. Obviously, there are other spots that you can do those dominant 7 shapes, but this is just an introduction video to this. If you hear a dominant 7 chord, play the dominant arpeggio over it, or play the diminished arpeggio over it, and vice versa. If you hear a diminished arpeggio, you can play diminished or dominant, because remember, they're almost the same triad if you space it out. F, A, C, and E flat would be your dominant 7, right? And then your diminished would be C, E flat, G flat, and then A natural. So they're almost the same chord, okay? That's why they sound really, really good together. When you do get to the level of modulation, of secondary dominant, and all that stuff, go for it and start doing it. See if you can maybe modulate to another key that's in the general vicinity. Like, for example, if I was in the key of B flat minor, that has 5 flats. What if I want to get to the key that has 4 flats, so F minor, okay? That might be a really good place to start. So what I would need is, if I'm trying to get to F minor, I would need a C7 chord. Okay, so that'd be a 5 of 7. So I would basically do something like... Do you see what I did there? I just went from B flat minor to F minor back to B flat minor because I'm really good at secondary dominance. If you're not at this level yet, do not worry. I have a really awesome video about secondary dominance, so click in the link in the description. It's also in my music theory help playlist, so you can click on that as well. If you feel like you need more help with that heavy music theory, things like advanced music theory and stuff like that, get in contact with me and we can see what we could do. My last tip that I have for you is related to what I said earlier about doing 1 key per month. Okay, so this is something I do in Shred Theory Mastery. So what I do with my students is I make sure that every time a new month hits, they're practicing in a new key. Okay, instead of staying in the same key for everything. And the way that we do things is once you learn certain shapes, you move them around in specific patterns to kind of understand tension and release with everything. And what you should do is apply that in this circumstance. Like if maybe this month is D flat major, B flat minor, then start going back the other way. Maybe next month is F major or A flat. I'm sorry, F minor or A flat major. Okay, you want to utilize all 12 keys within the whole calendar year, right? There's only 12 of them that you got to worry about, and most guitar players can only shred in a couple of keys confidently. And I use that word confidently because a lot of guitar players that I talk to, they say, yeah, I can shred in any key. But it's like, are you really comfortable with it? Can you quickly say, yes, I know the diminished chord, the dominant chord, I can spell out the triad in my head, I know exactly where everything goes. I'm very comfortable going across the fretboard in that key. That's kind of the main difference here, you know. And once you get through all those in a year, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable, and then you're just going to do it again. It's a really, really awesome tool to use. So I highly recommend you give that a shot. And so I'll see you guys in the next video.